to the darkroom. Today we're going to talk about printing photographs. You need to bring a couple of things in with you. The first thing that you need is a pad of paper and a pencil or a pen in order to write down your enlarger, aperture setting, and your exposure time. You'll also need your negatives, which have already been cut into strips of 5 and placed in the archival plastic holder. And you will need your photographic paper, which hopefully you've already purchased from me. The first thing that you're going to do when you come into the darkroom is set up your chemicals. The chemicals are in the cupboards underneath the wet table, and there are 3 different chemicals that you need. The first chemical is the developer. It's called Dectol. The second chemical is Stop Bath, and you should look to see that the jug says Print Stop Bath and not Film Stop Bath. They are different. And you will need Print Fixer as well. In addition to these 3 chemicals, we are also going to use a water bath. This black tray is specifically designed for that, so that water will flow out of the end of this tray and continuously rinse your photographs. You'll need trays, clean, dry trays. And when you set up your chemicals, you will always set them up in the same order, so that if anyone were to walk into this darkroom, they would automatically know which chemical was which. So we'll always start with Dectol at the very end, Stop Bath, Fixer, and then the water. There are 5 enlargers in here, but if there are more than 3 of you working in here at one time, you should set up 2 rows of trays. So you would have 2 sets of Dectol, 2 sets of Stop Bath, 2 sets of Fixer, and 1 water bath. Underneath this cupboard is also a pitcher to use for diluting your chemicals, and down here we also have jugs for reclaiming Stop Bath and reclaiming Fixer. Those are the 2 chemicals that we will reuse over and over again in order to save the environment and save money. So at the end of the process, when you are cleaning up, you should pour the Stop Bath into the Reclaim Stop Bath jug and the leftover Fixer into the Reclaim Fixer jug, and those will keep under here. You may also reuse these. Instead of using the fresh chemicals, you can simply use these chemicals instead of these in order, again, to save the environment and save money. For right now though, we'll put these underneath here, and we'll start by talking about diluting your chemicals. The first chemical that we're going to dilute is Dectol. That's our developer. Dectol is diluted at a 1:2 ratio. And in any ratio in photography, the first number is always the chemical, and the second number is always the water. So in a 1:2 ratio, and we are going to use 30 ounces, so we're going to fill this up to 30 ounces. In a 1:2 ratio of chemical to water, we are going to use 10 ounces of chemical and 20 ounces of water. However, for safety purposes, we are always going to put the water into the pitcher first. The reason behind that is if there is water in the pitcher first, and then we pour chemical in and it happens to splash on us, there is a higher concentrate of water, so that more water will be splashing onto you than will chemical. So we're always going to start with the water. So in this case, we're going to fill the water up to 20, and then we will top it off with 10 ounces of Dectol. When using water in the printing side, you want to make sure that the water isn't too hot or too cold. It's not as fussy as when you're developing film, but you do want to make sure that it's not, as I said, too hot or too cold. So I'm going to fill this up to 20 ounces. Check it. And then I will add 10 ounces of Dektol to create a total of 30 ounces. Now that I'm finished with this, I'll go ahead and put it away, and I'll pour my chemical into the tray. One thing that you really need to be careful of is not splashing your chemicals from one tray to another, and that includes not pouring any new chemicals into this pitcher until it's been rinsed out thoroughly. So, between chemicals, you always want to rinse out your pitcher. The second chemical that we're going to prepare is Stop Bath. Stop Bath is not diluted, so we're simply going to pour 20 ounces of straight Stop Bath, 30 ounces of straight Stop Bath into the pitcher. Now you can see that this is bright yellow. This Stop Bath is called Indicator Stop Bath. It's bright yellow when it's still fresh. When Stop Bath becomes exhausted, or when it's no longer able to be used, it turns purple. So you'll need to keep an eye on that while you're using it. The more oxygen that comes into contact with it, and the more photos that come into contact with your chemicals, the quicker they exhaust. I'm going to rinse out my pitcher. Stop Bath away. And the next chemical is Fixer, Print Fixer. Again, this is not diluted, so I'm just going to pour 30 ounces straight into the pitcher. Put that away. Pour my chemical into the tray. So, I have my chemicals all set up, Dektol, Stop Bath, Fixer, and I'm ready for water. The next thing that you'll need are your tongs, which are in this drawer down front here. I'll take out 4 tongs, 1 for each tray, because you don't want your chemicals to move back and forth. So when I'm using the developer, I will use the developer tongs. Stop Bath, I'll use the Stop Bath tongs, etc. The only other thing that I'll need from this side of the room is right underneath the tongs drawer. There's a drawer with black cards in them. And I'll need this black card over here at the enlarger. But you do want to make sure that you're setting up your chemicals the same way every time. Okay. The next thing you want to know about is the enlarger that you're going to use. I'm going to demonstrate on this enlarger because it's the oldest one. It's a little bit different than the others, but this is still a very good working enlarger. So a couple of things that you need to know first about the enlarger is that this is called the enlarger head. This is where the lens is, and I'll take the lens off for you, however you should never do this. The lens is just like a camera lens. It has an aperture ring just like the camera lens does, and it functions in the same way. So if I was to open this to 2.8, it would be the largest, widest aperture. If I were to close it down to f16, it would be the very smallest aperture on this lens. So it does have a working aperture ring just like your camera does. We will be setting the aperture ring at f11 to start with. So the first thing you should check when you walk into the darkroom is the aperture setting on your lens. The next thing you need to know is how to raise and lower the enlarger head. and that's with this over here, this crank. If you move it away from you, that brings it down, and if you move it towards you, that brings it up. When I start focusing on the photograph and cropping my photograph, you'll see how that changes the size and the shape of the image. And so you will be using that lever to raise the enlarger head up or down in order to crop your photograph. The second crank that you need to know about is this one right here. This is used for focusing your photograph, and I'll show that to you more closely when I actually put film in the enlarger. The next thing you need to know about is the negative carrier. And look at that, there's a negative in there. This is where you will put your negatives, and you need to remember to pick them up and take them with you when you leave. So this opens up, and you'll place your negatives over that square opening. You should also notice that there's a ring on the bottom of this negative carrier. If you were to look inside here, you would also see a ring. You want to slide the negative carrier in and down so that it doesn't move, it doesn't pull out. To pull this out, I would have to lift it up and pull it out, and that's because of the ring on the bottom of this. This is the negative carrier. The next thing I want to tell you about is the timer box. On this particular enlarger, you have two knobs that you're going to be working with. You will never, ever touch this white sliding lever down here. On the left, we have increments of 10. On the right, we have increments of 1. So for example, if I wanted a 2-second exposure, I would simply turn this knob to 2. However, if I wanted a 22-second exposure, I would then add 20 seconds on the left. So now I have a total of 20 and 2. Right now, this timer is set on time. I could turn it to off and nothing would change at this point. If I'm to change this to focus, then the light comes on. It's kind of difficult to see that right now, but maybe you can see that the light is shining down here on this board. So the light, when it's on focus, will stay on for as long as you need it to. And that's when you should raise or lower the enlarger head and use the focusing knob to bring your negative into focus. Once I have my negative focused and I'm ready to shoot an exposure, I'll switch this back to time. You can see that the light has gone out. But when I'm ready to, I'll push this red button which says expose underneath it, and the light will come on for 22 seconds because that's what I have it set for. And after exactly 22 seconds, the light will go off all on its own. This enlarger is exactly the same as any of the others in here with the exception of the timer. I'll show you the timer on this enlarger. This enlarger also has a switch for time and focus. Right now it's on time. So if I were to press this center button, the light would stay on, it looks like, for 8 seconds. If I want the light to go on and stay on, I don't know if you can see that over here, I've just switched it down to focus, and this enlarger light will stay on for as long as I need it to stay on. When I'm ready to make an exposure, I'll switch this back to time, and I'll use this white ring on the outside of this dial. I'll use this white ring to set my exposure time. There's a little W on the outside of this ring, and I'm going to put the point of that W exactly on the exposure time that I want. So I have it set for 10 seconds. When I'm ready, I'm going to very gently press this center button. You don't need to punch it, you just need to hit it very gently. And it will automatically turn the light on for 10 seconds, and it will turn off when that time is done. So those are the two sets of timers in this room. So up until this point, everything can be done under these bright lights. You would set up your chemicals with the lights on. You would set up your enlarger with the lights on. You could even put your negative into this easel with the lights on. However, once you are using photographic paper, you need to have the safety lights on. Even as we speak, this paper is being exposed, and if we were to develop this paper, it would turn perfectly black. However, under orange lights, you can expose photographic paper without harming it at all. So for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to leave the lights on, but you should understand that from here on, everything should be done only under the safety lights, which are orange. So I've taken my paper out of my container, out of my envelope, and I have put my envelope, I've closed the envelope again, and I'm putting it back into the drawer so that it's safe in case accidents happen and someone happens to turn on the light. In that case, your paper will not be exposed to light, and it'll be good to use for as long as you need to. I have also cut this 8 by 10 piece of paper in half for our test strip. Remember, we're going to first make a test strip to determine the proper exposure time of our contact sheet. So I only need one piece of paper, so I'm going to put the other half ideally back into the envelope. The other half sheet of paper, I'm going to slide underneath my negatives. Now, this won't cover all of the negatives that you have here, but really we're just trying to determine the proper exposure time, so it's not important that every single negative is covered. Now, when we make a test strip, your timer needs to be set at 2 seconds. Right now, my timer is set at 22. So I'm going to turn this 20 knob back to 0, and this singles knob is on 2. And now I'm going to change my switch over here to time. With my black card, what I'm going to do is cover all of my negatives except for one strip. Now, I'm going to expose only one strip at a time, and I'm going to expose each strip for I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay,
Keep going, I'll cut it out.
I'm going to expose just one strip right now, and but only for 2 seconds. Then I'm going to move the black card over. Now I'll have 2 strips of negatives exposed. I will expose both of those strips for 2 seconds. I will do the same thing for each of the rows of negatives that I have here. So I'll just show you this very quickly. I have all but one row exposed or covered up. My timer is set for 2 seconds. My aperture on my lens is set at f11, so I'm ready to go. All I have to do is press this red button. The light goes on for 2 seconds, goes off for 2 seconds, or goes off immediately. I'm going to move the black card over. Now I have 2 rows exposed, and I'm going to hit the red button, and it stays on for 2 seconds and goes off. I'm going to move that over. And I will do this until I have finally exposed all of the negatives on this half sheet of paper. For the final one, you can just take the black card off and expose the whole sheet. Now, again, under the safety lights, you'll take your paper out from underneath your negatives. Something else I should have told you beforehand, I want to tell you now, is that you want to make sure that the emulsion side of the paper is facing up. Now you can tell the emulsion side of the paper because it's a little bit shiny, and you might be able to see that sheen in the light. If I were to turn this paper over to the wrong side, you probably wouldn't be able to see that shininess. Even under the darkness of the safety lights, you can still see the sheen. Now this is matte paper. If I were using glossy paper, you'd be able to see it even more easily, but you want to make sure that the emulsion side is up. So I've taken this paper out, emulsion side up. The next thing I'm going to do is develop this test strip. So, come over to my chemicals, and I'm going to put it into the Dektol first. Now, you put it into the Dektol for 2 minutes, then we'll move it to the stop bath for 30 seconds, then to the fixer for 2 minutes, and then we'll let it rinse in the water for no more than 4 to 10 minutes. When you're putting your paper into the water, I want you to think of sliding the paper underneath the water, just to try to get the chemicals to cover it all at once, as much as possible. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to time this with my watch. That's what's easiest for me because I have a watch. If you don't have a watch, there is a timer at the end of the dark table, or at the end of the wet table here. And what we could do is just set this for the class period. And you can see that the second hand is moving now. You would watch when you put your paper into the chemical and notice, well, maybe let's say you put your paper into the chemical at where it hit 45. Then you would need to make sure that you watched as the second hand went around twice for 2 minutes and pay attention to that so that you can take your paper out when you need to take it out. For this demonstration, however, I'll just use my watch. And again, I'm going to slide the paper, almost slide it underneath the chemicals. Now, you have to, while the paper is in there, you need to agitate the tray. And agitation moves the chemicals over the paper so that fresh chemicals are constantly coming into contact with your paper. If you want to use your tongs, you may, and you can see that this paper is totally black right now because it's been exposed to this light. But what I don't want you to do with the tongs, I don't want you to push your paper around. This emulsion is still very fragile at this point. And by pushing the paper around, you could actually smudge the image on your paper. So, agitation is simply rocking the tray back and forth the entire time that the paper is in the chemical. It's not water world. You want to make sure that you're not splashing, but very gently just moving the tray back and forth and forward and back for the entire 2 minutes. Okay, so let's say that the entire 2 minutes has passed. Now I'm going to take my tongs and I'm going to very gently try to pick up this piece of paper. You might look for a little bulge on the side of it. Oh. Okay, now I'm going to hold the paper over the tray and just let excess chemicals drip. You don't want to shake your paper. If I shake my paper, chemicals could mix, which is bad. You don't want your chemicals to mix with each other. So I'm just letting my chemicals drip off. I might even just drag it along the side of the tray. And then I'm going to take my paper and put it into my stop bath. Again, trying to slide it underneath the chemicals. Again, 30 seconds in the stop bath. And I'm agitating the entire time. So I would either look at my watch or look at the timer to make sure that I have the proper amount of time. And after 30 seconds, again, you'll take your tongs from the stop bath tray, grab your paper, let it drip, and then move on to the fixer. You're agitating in the fixer for 2 minutes. Again, agitating the whole time, just moving gently backward and forward. Now, after your paper has been in the fixer for at least 2 minutes, at that point, if you are the only one in the darkroom, then you can turn on the lights and look at your paper. However, if you're working with other people, you can't turn the lights on. So, in order to analyze your paper, your photographs, after 2 minutes, you'll let the excess fixer drain back into the tray. We'll put the paper into the water bath, and actually this water bath should be running the whole time so that fresh water is constantly moving over these photographs. So you would leave your paper in here for just a few seconds, just long enough to get the chemicals off of it. Would you hand me one of those trays over there? when you're looking at your photographs, you are always going to carry them in one of these trays. Chances are you'll be working in here with other people and you'll need to actually go outside of the darkroom to look and see what's on your paper. Not very interesting, but I do want to show you that you need to use these trays so that we're not dripping chemicals all over the carpets. These chemicals do stain, so it's important that you carry your paper around in a tray. Also, you want to be careful not to touch your paper very much because, again, the emulsion is still very fragile. I could still, with my fingernails, scratch this piece of paper very easily. So you want to be careful not to touch it very much. Even a fingerprint, if I squeezed this paper very hard or smudged it, you could smudge an image on your paper, and you've worked very hard, so you don't want to do that at this point. So, going back over here, we have just made our test strip. In an effort to create our contact sheet. And your test strip is going to look like this. The images on one end will be much darker than the images on the other end. And this is how you would read this test strip. The lightest image has the shortest amount of exposure time. So this lightest image I know has only 2 seconds of exposure time. This one is a little bit darker, it has 4 seconds of exposure time. So then is even darker, it has 6, this has 8, and this has 10. So that's how you read your test strip. The purpose of the test strip, again, is to determine the proper exposure time for the entire contact sheet. Here's what I'm looking for. I'm actually not going to look at the images in the pictures. I'm not going to look at the pictures themselves. I'm actually going to look at the outside of the film where the lettering, where it says Kodak, is and where the sprockets are. The outside of the film should be black. The lettering where it says Kodak should be white. Down here you can see this, the outside of the film where the sprockets are, that's very light gray. This is a little bit darker, this is a little bit darker, darker, and even darker still. But yet the letters and numbers are still white up here. So I'm going to use a 10-second, I'm going to decide that I need a 10-second exposure time for my complete contact sheet. Now, the contact sheet is important, but it's not nearly as important as your final photograph. So I don't want you to spend a lot of time poring over which exposure time is best. This is important, not nearly as important as your final photograph, however. So I make a very quick analysis and decision. I think 10 seconds looks good, so that's what I'm going to do. So the next step is to take out that whole sheet of paper. You're not going to cut this one. You're going to slide the whole sheet of paper underneath all of your negatives and make sure that they are all going to be exposed onto the paper. I've determined that 10 seconds looks good, so I need to change my timer. So now I'm going to change this single digit dial down to 0, and I'm going to change this dial that's in increments of 10s up to 10. I haven't moved anything on my easel, I haven't moved my enlarger head, so I know that when I press that button, everything is going to be fine, it's going to be exposed properly. So all I need to do now is step back and press the button. For this, you do not need the black card. You're going to allow the entire sheet of paper to be exposed. So I'm going to press the button, the light comes on for 10 seconds, it'll go off on its own for 10 seconds, and then I'll take it over to the chemicals and develop it. Okay, I just heard the light click and go off. So then I would take this back over to my chemicals and do the exact same thing that I just did with my test strip. I'm going to slide the paper underneath the chemicals, and then I'm going to gently agitate for 2 minutes in the developer, 30 seconds in the stop bath, 2 minutes in the fixer, and then I'm going to let my photograph rinse for a minimum of 4 minutes. So I'm not going to do that for you because you've seen that demonstration. But what's important to remember is that you do need to agitate your chemicals in the trays for the entire time. You can't just simply put the paper in, agitate it once or twice, and then go do something else. You need to stay with it. Okay, so I've created my contact sheet, which looks like this. The purpose of the contact sheet is to determine which photo I want to enlarge. That's truly the only purpose. Now, the very first thing that you should look for when you're deciding which photo to enlarge is focus. Your photograph, the subject in your photo, must be sharp and clearly focused. So you want to make sure that there's no blur that shouldn't be there. So if I look at my contact sheet, I think I like this one at the very end the best. Actually, no, let's do this one. Okay, so frame number 19. That's the sole purpose of this, is to find the one that you're going to enlarge. Frame number 19 is the one that I want, so I can put that away. Now, I'm finished with this easel, because the only thing that you do with this easel is create a contact sheet. I've just created my contact sheet, so now I can put this away in my drawer. To make an enlargement, we're going to need this easel. Now, this easel creates a beautiful small 1/4 inch frame all the way around your photograph, so you don't have to worry about that. But you do have to know how to use this easel. So this is the frame, and when you are putting your paper inside your frame, I don't know if you can see this, but there are notches on the left side and up at the top. I'm going to take my paper, once I'm ready, and the lights are out, and I'm going to push it up as far as I can and over to the left so that my paper is stopped by those notches. Then, when it's sitting flat on this table and in the correct place, then I can just very gently lower the frame onto the paper that holds the paper in place, and it creates that nice 1/4 inch frame, white frame around my photograph. But we have some things that we need to do first. First, we need to get frame number 19. Out of my negatives. And I need to put that in my negative carrier. So I'm going to lift up on the negative carrier, open it up. I'm going to take someone else's negatives out and be gentle with them. And I'm going to put my own negatives in. For the image to show right side up on the easel, you actually need to have your negative upside down. Now when you're putting your negative into the negative carrier, you can kind of see that the negative has a curve to it, kind of like a speed bump. I like to say speed bump up, okay? So you want to make sure that the curved side, just like a speed bump, is up. It wouldn't be cupped that way. Close up the negative carrier, and you do want to be careful not to touch your negatives very much so that you don't get fingerprints on them. Just touch the very edges of them. And now I'm going to drop this back down into the enlarger. One thing that's very important before you actually make your exposure is to dust your negative. Dust is around us all the time, and this is old equipment, so there's dust inside that is actually falling down onto your negative as we speak. Dust may seem unnoticeable to us, but when it lands on top of your negative, it actually blocks the light from going down to your photograph, and it creates white lines and squiggles and marks on your paper. And as we've discussed in class, white is what our eyes are naturally drawn to. So you don't want your viewers' eyes to see dust on your paper, so we need to dust your negative first. In this container there are several different tools, and you are going to use one of these small paint brushes. Now, this may seem a little strange, but even the pros do this. In order to have the dust actually adhere to this little paintbrush, what you're going to do, and this is only for people who don't wear makeup, you're actually going to take the brush and brush it on your nose just a tiny little bit. And then, very carefully, you're going to lift up this flap here, and with the light on, the focus light, I'm going to very gently pick up any dust that is sitting on top of my negative. You'll be able to see the dust on your negative because it'll be white. And the dust will naturally adhere to this paintbrush. However, you want to be careful of this metal collar. It's very easy, if you're not careful, to scratch your negative with the metal collar of this paintbrush. So just very gently, I'm going to pick up the dust on both the top and the bottom of my negative. Now, I should do that before every exposure that I make, because even though I've just dusted this negative, dust is still falling down on top of it. And because dust is so visible on your photographs, you really need to make sure that you do that every single time. When you're finished with the paintbrush, make sure that it goes back into the container. So in order for you to see the whole series, or the whole process of what we've just done, I'll just show you what we've been through together. The first thing we did is we created a test strip of our contact sheet. We analyzed the test strip, 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 6 seconds, 8 seconds, 10 seconds, from lightest to darkest. And we determined that a 10-second exposure time is perfect for our full contact sheet. We then printed a full contact sheet for 10 seconds. Remember that the contact sheet is important, but it's not nearly as important as the final product. We use the contact sheet to determine which photo we're going to enlarge, and the number one thing that you should think about when you're choosing your photograph is focus. Make sure that the photograph that you choose is sharply in focus. So we would choose our photograph, and the next thing we would do is create a test strip of that photograph. Simply because the contact sheet is exposed for 10 seconds does not mean that every photograph will be exposed at 10 seconds. So we created a test strip again, and we looked at each 2-second exposure, and we analyzed which would be the best, which has blacks, which has whites, and a range of grays in between. And we determined that on this test strip, 12 seconds would be best. One thing that you can do that I talked about is shoot on a half a sheet of paper that photograph at 12 seconds. So then you can actually look and see what 12 seconds is going to look like in most of the photograph, because here we're just looking at one little strip of the photograph. So it's possible to look at the whole thing at 12 seconds. If that doesn't look good to you, there's something that you can do at this point. Right now we have our lens set at f11. If I think that this is too dark, one thing that I can actually do is change the aperture on my lens. And if it's too dark, I'm going to want to create a smaller aperture. So I would go from f11 to f16. Now, whenever you change anything on your enlarger, you need to do another test strip. So you can see that this test strip is a little bit lighter already. Whenever you change to a smaller aperture, you need to know that you're going to have a longer exposure time because you're letting less light through your lens. So you're going to need a longer exposure time. I recommend, if you're using f16 or even a smaller aperture, some of these enlargers have f22 or even f45. I recommend that when you are making your test strip that you count the number of exposures that you make, because sometimes it's very difficult to see where one exposure ends and the other begins. So if you count the number of exposures that you have, you actually might be able to, you might have to count backwards. For example, if I know that I did 20 2-second exposures, then my longest exposure time is going to be 40 seconds. The next one is 38, 36, 34, 32, 30, and so on. So you may have to count from the dark end towards the light end. So whenever you change anything on your enlarger, you need to do a new test strip. Create a new test strip, analyze it, determine the proper exposure time, and then you can go ahead and create your photograph. Now, I was telling you about that beautiful little 1/4 inch frame, and this is an example of the frame that this easel will make. So it has a perfect, well, almost perfect little border around the outside here, and that was simply created by making sure that my paper was in the right place and very gently putting my the frame down around the easel. Next thing that I need to do is crop and focus my photograph. So in order to do that, I'm going to turn the focus light on so that it comes on and stays on. For this, I think I'm going to try turning off the light and see how that works, if there's enough light. I don't know if that'll work so well. Okay, so I want to make sure that you know that underneath the lights you should not have your photographic paper on here yet. So I've taken my photographic paper off, but what I want to show you is that when I turn on the focus light, the light will stay on for as long as I need it to stay on. You can maybe see this image on the easel. Now I'm going to use the enlarger handle. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is try to focus my image, and you'll probably notice it's very out of focus, but the longer I spend turning back and forth, I can bring my image into focus. What I like to do is get my face right down next to the image and try to remember what I focused on. So I have a picture of a little girl here on a swing, so I'm going to assume that I focused on her, and I'm going to look at her and move her in and out of focus until I get to a point that I think is perfect. So I have it focused so that I can see my image. Now I need to decide how to crop my image. And by cropping I mean I need to determine what is going to be where in my photograph. What will the composition of my photograph look like? And if you remember our discussions of the rule of thirds, I'm going to make sure that my subject, the girl on the swing, is actually not in the center of the photograph where she is right now. So I can change this simply by moving the placement of the easel. And I can bring her down closer to the lower left-hand corner, or I can move her over a little bit and, oh look, there's her father over here. And I can bring him into the picture. I could also rotate my easel this way, and I can even enlarge this a little bit by moving the enlarger head, by changing the position with this crank. And maybe I'll decide that I only want her in the picture. Now whenever you raise or lower the enlarger head, you need to refocus your photograph. So I'm going to move back to this knob and focus once again. Now here's a little tip for focusing. I don't know if you'll be able to see this either, but what I'm going to do is, right now, it's very difficult to see the image on the easel because I'm set at f11 on my aperture. One way to be very clear about focus is to open up your aperture to its widest position. And on this enlarger, this lens, it's 2.8. So I've moved it from f11 to 2.8. That will make it very bright and I can see what I'm looking at and focus very clearly. However, you want to make sure that once you're finished focusing, you change your aperture back to f11. It'll make it very dark down here, but that's okay. Okay, so I have my image focused, I know that, and I have my image centered, I have it cropped the way I want it to. So the next thing I need to do is to create a contact sheet of that image. And that contact sheet will be similar to the contact sheet that I used for my this test strip will be similar to the one that I used for my contact sheet. I have very light exposures on the bottom and darker ones on the top. This is specific. So the next thing we want to do is to create a test strip of this photograph. And the test strip, the purpose of the test strip is to determine the correct exposure time. So just as with the test strip of our contact sheet, we're going to look at these exposure strips. The lightest ones have less time, the darker ones have more time. So in order to do that, I'm going to take out my half sheet of paper and my black card. And with the emulsion side up, I'm going to place the half sheet of paper right down the center of my photograph, or wherever I think my subject is. And with this cropping, I know that I have my subject right about here. Now, remember, for test strips, we need to set our timer for 2 seconds. So I'm going to change this back to 0 and turn this dial to 2. I'm going to turn off the light and turn it back to time. And you want to make sure not to expose your paper under the light until you're ready. And then using this black card, we're going to create a test strip in the similar fashion that we did with the contact sheet. So what I'll do is I'll place the black card over my piece of paper so that about a thumb's width of paper is showing. I have it set at 2 seconds. I have this set at my lens set at f11, so I'm ready to expose for 2 seconds. And then I'll move the black card again about an additional thumb's width. I'll press the button and expose it again and move the black card. One thing that you need to be careful of is not to move your photographic paper once you've started. If you accidentally drag your paper or move it at all, that will change your exposure times, and it'll be very difficult to actually read your test strip. So you want to very carefully move your black card down your photographic paper until the end, and then you'll expose the whole thing. Now, once again, we've just created a test strip, just like this. I would take this piece of paper and I would go over to my chemicals once again. I would slide the paper underneath the chemicals, Dektol for 2 minutes, stop bath for 30 seconds, fixer for 2 minutes, and a minimum of 4 minutes of rinsing time. Again though, the test strip is really just to determine the proper exposure. So what I'm going to do is look at my exposure times, and you can probably see a little bit of the differences in each of these exposures. And what I'm looking for is an exposure time that has black blacks, white whites, and a range of grays in between. Remember, the lightest ones have the least amount of time. So this tiny little exposure strip right here, this is 2 seconds. This next one is 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. I've done a total of 10 2-second exposures for 20 seconds. It looks to me as if 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, maybe 12 seconds is going to be best. So what I would do next is set up my easel with a full sheet of paper in order to expose this whole frame for 12 seconds. Now, something I want to clarify very quickly for you is that simply because we chose 10 seconds for our contact sheet does not mean that every photograph on this sheet is going to be perfectly exposed at 10 seconds. That's why we do the test strip for each individual photograph that we're going to enlarge. So we decided we wanted to enlarge this one, so we did a second test strip. And in analyzing this, we can see that 12 seconds is probably going to be best for this photograph. Now, one thing that you can do before actually using an entire sheet of paper to create a photograph is to take out another half sheet of paper, a new one that has not been exposed yet, and you can again put it about where your subject is in the photograph and expose just this half a sheet of paper for 12 seconds and see how it looks. In that case, I would change my timer. I would add this 10 seconds to the 2 that I already have, and I wouldn't use the black card. I would simply press my exposure button, the light comes on, and when it goes off, I would then develop this piece of paper. That would then tell me if 12 seconds is going to be perfect. You could also simply expose the whole photograph. In that case, you would take out a fresh piece of paper, a whole piece, open up your frame, make sure that your paper is up against the notches on the easel. Very gently put your frame down. Make sure again I'm at F11 and I have 12 seconds. I'm not going to use my black card, and I'm simply going to press the button and have the exposure expose the piece of paper. Once I'm finished with that, again I would go over to the chemicals and I would put it into the developer for, again, 2 minutes in the developer, 30 seconds in the stop bath, 2 minutes in the fixer, and then a minimum of 4 minutes in the water. The final thing that we're going to do is squeegee off our photographs that have been rinsing and put them in the drying racks. So again, you want to be careful with your photographs because they're wet and they're still fragile. The first thing that I would do with the water on is wet a portion of the table to make sure that there's, first of all, nothing on the table, no chemicals, and make sure that I have a slippery surface for my squeegee. Now, this squeegee is only used for photographs. You should never ever use this squeegee on the wet table, because if dust or dirt adheres to this squeegee and then you squeegee off your photograph, chances are you'll have big scratches across them. Also, you want to make sure that there are no chemicals on them, so I would just go ahead and dip them into dip the squeegee into the water. Then I'm going to pick up just one corner of my piece of paper and very gently and lightly brush the water off of my photograph. Now, your photograph is not going to be dry when you're done. However, excess water won't be sitting in pools on your photograph. Then again, gently, you're going to come over to the drying rack, and it'll be dark in here. Most likely it'll be dark. So you need to make sure that there are no other wet photographs or even no dry photographs in the place where you want to put your photo. If photos are stacked on top of each other and left to dry, they will stick to each other and you'll never be able to get them apart very well. So it's important to make sure that you have a clear space up here. You can feel with your hands if you need to, and simply put your photographs on these drying racks to dry. It takes about 30 to 45 minutes for a photograph to dry completely. And you do need to be careful that you're not touching your photographs while they're still wet, because again, you can make smudges or leave fingerprints on them. And after you've spent all this time creating these photos, you don't want to do that. So the final thing that I want to say is, if you ever have questions, any at all, please make sure that you come to ask me about them. This process may seem difficult right now, but after you've done it a few times, it'll actually be very, very simple. So if you do have questions, it's important that you ask. I'm always here to show you how to create even that border, which is very simple, or talk to you about how to dilute your chemicals. This class time is your class time. So don't hesitate to ask any questions, and I'd be happy to demonstrate for you. The final thing that you should do in this classroom space is clean up. Please remember that we do reclaim both stop bath and fixer, And we have reclaimed jugs underneath here. I also have a funnel to make pouring into the jug much easier. If the stop bath is purple, you don't want to reclaim it. If it's yellow, go ahead and reclaim it though. You'll need to rinse off your tongs and make sure that those go back in the drawer. Please make sure that your black cards go back in the drawer as well. And when you've rinsed out all of your trays, all of your empty trays, please make sure that you stack them crosswise, crisscrossed, and upside down so that they drain and dry. And that's the final step. You should rinse off the wet table with water. I have sponges down here. So rinse off that, stack everything, make sure that your timer is turned off, and your greatest defense against theft in this darkroom is to make sure that the lights are turned off when you leave. Thank you very much.